Just want to say welcome to Back the Culture Show, the Jamaica National Hero series. We are on number 6, yes? National Hero number 6. Talking about Norman Manley. As we back the culture, and we tell the stories of our national heroes. Tonight we'll have a deep dive into the life, the legacy of Norman Manley. Some call him the people's national hero. But before we go any further, do me a favor real quick. Please share the feed, share the link. Tell somebody. We want the whole world right now to know the true story about our national heroes. It was for the working class.
Come together and make it work.
Back the Culture Show. Some distinguished guests lined up for you.
Working for the next day. 2 days to go. Working for the next day.
Will be very informative.
1 day to go.
As we celebrate the life of our national heroes. We're at number 6. Norman Manley. Your leader, the message.
My father Banya, my father Banya, my grandmother Banya, my grandmother Banya.
You will learn so much this evening.
Ayana Ibanya, Ayana Ibanya, my leader Banya, my leader Banya. That's why I not live, no I not live. He gave me a message to all those people who no love progress,
As I said, he was a champion
Juke them with land lease.
of the poor.
Said to juke them with land lease. Let the juke them with the pioneer war. Juke them with the pioneer war.
We got so much in store for you. Let's get together right now as we give to you the national anthem, and then we go right into the program. So get together for the national anthem.
Men, equal pay for women. Juke them with the minimum wage. Juke them with the minimum wage.
Eternal Father, bless our land. Guard us with thy mighty hand. Keep us free from evil eyes. Be our light through countless eyes. To our leaders, great defender, grant true wisdom from above. Justice, truth be ours forever. Jamaica, land we love. respect for all, stir response to duty's call, strengthen us the weak to cherish, give us vision lest we perish, knowledge ascend us, heavenly Father, grant true wisdom from above, justice, truth be ours forever, Jamaica, land we love, Jamaica, 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 land we love.
Hello, my name is Charles Smart, and I'm the creator and executive producer of the Jamaica Heroes Modernized Back at the Culture Show. I'd like to express my gratitude to the group of people that work so hard to produce each of these episodes. Our advisory board members, our DJ, our crew, our panelists, and of course you, our viewers. We appreciate you watching. Since January, we've celebrated our heroes once a month in recognition of Jamaica's 60th anniversary of independence. Remember, those who built Jamaica's foundation have made it possible for us to celebrate our independence. Every month, including tonight, a panel of historians, authors, academics, dignitaries, and entertainers engage in a thorough conversation about one of our heroes. This is the 6th installment of a 7-part series, and tonight we honor Norman Washington Manley's life and his accomplishments. The Jamaica Heroes Modernized project, of which the Back the Culture show is a component, aims to modernize the Jamaica narrative, to redefine how our national heroes are portrayed, and connect the world to our culture. We are doing this in 5 different ways. Through a film series that will introduce the world to our geography, culture, lifestyle, traditions, and customs. Through original Jamaican music, through fine art paintings, one of which you see behind me, and through a digital platform where you are now viewing this. And finally, through print material that will be distributed to schools all over the island. We ask you to follow us on Instagram at Jamaica National Heroes, or log on to our website at JamaicaNationalHeroes.com to learn more about what we're doing. But for now and tonight, we kindly ask that you share the link with your friends, hit the like button, and post a comment. And don't forget to join us again on July 27th at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for the series' last installment on Alexander Bustamante. Enjoy the show tonight, and thanks again for watching.
Good evening. Welcome to this evening's edition of the Back the Culture series, and today we focus on Norman Washington Manley. Our panelists this evening are Maxine Henry Wilson, Vincent Morrison, as well as Professors Trevor Munroe and Anthony Bogues. Good evening to each of you and welcome.
Thank you. Good evening. Good evening, everybody.
Thank you for having us.
We'll start with you, Mrs. Henry Wilson. If you could give us a brief background as to who you are. I hate the phrase your claim to fame, but we can use that for today.
Okay, I really don't have any claim to fame. I joined the People's National Party's secretariat long ago, won't tell you when, as a political education officer. And I joined in that particular role because I have always said that Norman Manley was the cause for my being a member of the People's National Party. I know it can be misunderstood, but apart from his being this very eloquent person, great wordsmith, etc., you should listen to him. I've never really met him. I saw him once in person at a public meeting. But I really felt that the PNP used to say, members of the PNP used to say that Norman Manley is a statesman and not a politician. And for me, that was a very poignant statement. For me, he has been the statesman of all statesmen, and I will expand on that. So that was my initial encounter with the PNP. And then From there, I've worked as Deputy General Secretary. I've worked as a General Secretary. I've been a Minister of Government. So I've had a very long relationship with the People's National Party.
And for you, Vincent Morrison, if you could just give us a quick background and your own connection to the hero we discussed today.
Well, I think the main connection is that we're both from the parish of Manchester. He's from the south and I'm from northwest, Malgally. But there's no question that Norman Manley is the statesman of all statesmen. He is easily the greatest Jamaican that I know. He has sacrificed. He has virtually done everything because of the love that he had for Jamaica. Outstanding Jamaica.
And for you, Professor Trevor Munroe?
Well, first of all, as a youngster growing up on the eve of Jamaica's independence from a relatively middle-class background, Norman Manley was the hero to most of our generation. Subsequent to that, of course, when we became radicalized in confronting the inequities, the class and racial boundaries in Jamaica, we would have been far more critical of Norman Manley. And in fact, my two personal encounters with him, one as an academic, interviewing him in the late 1960s for my doctoral thesis. And earlier than that, as a young socialist activist in an antagonistic engagement where we felt that the policy of the People's National Party was insufficiently radical at the time, and Norman Manley defended the policy. And it was an interesting engagement at the time. And much later, I became a member of the People's National Party for 5 or 6 years between 2002 and 2007. One developed a more mature view of him, and I certainly believe that our criticisms of him in the radical movement were somewhat unfair. And to that extent, I have a far more balanced view of him as a national hero of Jamaica. And like every national hero, with his faults, shortcomings, I know no human being national hero otherwise who doesn't have those. And to that extent, I celebrate him as a major founder of Jamaican nationhood.
Oh, Professor Tony Bogues, how do you see the image of Norman Manley, and how did you come to be introduced to who he was as a man, a statesman, and of course, national hero?
Yeah, I came to, I grew up in the 70s, came of age in the 70s, and like many young people in the 1970s, was drawn to left politics. In the 1980s, was drawn to the People's National Party after the defeat, joined the party's secretariat, if my memory serves me right, in January 1981 as a research officer, and then became political education secretary up until 1992. In that period between 1981 and 1992, I learned a great deal about Norman Manley, not just from reading Rex Neckerford's remarkable texts, but from listening to ordinary PNP people in groups, some of them who had memories of Norman Manley, talking about him and what he represented. Also was fascinated by him when I did a very long interview with Richard Hart about the People's National Party's left. And what struck me in that interview was that despite the political disagreements, which Richard spoke very eloquently of between himself and W. Manley, there was this profound respect for N.W. Manley as a person. And that N.W. couldn't, you could disagree with him politically, but that you could not fault him as a personality or as a person of integrity in the political field. And so the impression I had of him, particularly from Richard and particularly from people in party groups and party members, was this man of ironclad integrity. That I took away. I know, people said he's a statesman and so on and so forth, but that ironclad integrity and a certain fixity of purpose, that was the word that was used about him. And that fixity of purpose, I thought, were specific qualities which were required for nation building. And therefore, he was and is, in my view, one of the most important fathers of the Jamaican nation.
Mrs. Henry Wilson, perhaps you could give us a better understanding of locating the principles and the philosophy, if you will, of Norman Manley in an understanding of where he hailed from. Vincent has pointed it out that Norman Manley was born in the southern Manchester, but in terms of his early childhood up to, say, his education at Jamaica College, who would he have been and how was he formed by the environment and the period within which he grew up?
Well, the stories that are told is that, he lived in Manchester, was born in Manchester like me, and he, early in his life, his father died and they moved to Bellersgate. But throughout all of that, you see his educational prowess. He was obviously an outstanding student and an outstanding scholar. And at the time, the number of persons who entered the high school, certainly of the reputation of Jamaica College, was very limited. But he got into Jamaica College, and the JC past students are very eager and anxious to embrace him. But in addition to his intellectual prowess, he was a scholar. He was an athlete. And it's interesting to speak to persons who keep records of athletic performance. And they will tell you that it is very, very recently that somebody has been able to break his 100-yard record. So he was also, he kept horses of the morning, right? Kept horses. And so he really was what you could call the quintessential Renaissance man. He had all of these dimensions to him. And then, of course, from Jamaica College, he went to Warren, then he went to Oxford, outstanding legal personality. All the legal luminaries still look up to him as somebody who is path-breaking in many respects. But in addition, just some stories that are told. One of the things I used to do when I was just became acquainted with the PNP, I used to go up to Jamaica House and talk to Mrs. Carmen Gauntlet, who was his secretary of many, many years. And unfortunately, we never captured the history from people like her. But when she spoke about him, she was a kind of deification. She talked about the fact that she was an outstanding secretary, stenographer. I don't know anybody who could type as fast as she was. And I used to say to her, Mrs. Gauntlet, why you type so fast? She said, because if Mr. Manley ever gave me anything to do and I took long, when he came out and lambasted it, you would have to type a little faster. She never made an error, because she said if you put the foot stop in the wrong place, he would cross it out and you had to type it all over again. So you get the sense of somebody who is a perfectionist, and a perfectionist also not just in those kinds of details. But Keebleman spoke of him when they were trying to decide whether they were going to put houses up at Harborview. He personally went out to Harborview with the architects and all the other persons and scouted out where he thought the housing should be. He didn't leave anything to chance. He was one of those persons who was meticulous, looked at every detail, and this is always the impression I get from persons who speak with him. So you really couldn't fool around when you dealt with it. Unfortunately, that Nettleford didn't finish that series, because when you read it, you see a mind that is organized, but a mind that is visionary in the way in which, of course, as you said, there are flaws, and we can come back to those. But I think there's so much about his person, as I said, ironclad integrity, died a pauper because he just never believed that in public life, you should be scrounging for yourself. So those are my kinds of recollections.
Right. And
Raymond, may I say something about that early experience, which certainly allows many of the young people today to identify with this grand hero, but who was in so many ways very human. The social and political historians tell us that when his father died, and subsequent to that, he was really a rebel. At Jamaica College, he went there, and the custom of the day was that the youngsters would be bullied by the older students, and he would have none of it. He actually fought against that, built a group around him, which, you know, some could call a gang, not the gang of the time we have today, but a group of young students who would not put up with the bullying, who fought back to the extent that Manley, as he was a youngster, got himself in trouble with a number of the masters at Jamaica House. And one social and political historian, Arnold Bertram, tells us that he still has a record of being the only student at Jamaica College who was reported in the same day by all masters to the headmaster because of breaking the rules. And of course, when his mother died, he was 13, that event made him turn around his life. And that's one of the things that I'm so impressed about Norman Manley, his ability to self-change in circumstances which require it. So at that point, he then did all the things that Maxine describes. He turned himself into a real scholar, applying himself, track, athletics, football, rifle shooting. And when he told the principal that he was going to apply for the Rhodes Scholarship initially, the principal said, you're joking. That's for persons who excel in academics and in sport. And then he became influenced by the deputy principal, who became his mentor. And the rest is history, as they say. He got a Rhodes Scholarship and became that excellent, outstanding intellectual and professional that we all know about. But he didn't, you know, like so many youngsters who excel later, he had to turn himself around. He had to take himself in hand and say, look, the rebel without a cause, even with a cause, is not going to carry where I'd like to go in life. So I just wanted to add that touch to what Maxine just said, which is absolutely on target, as she said.
So Professor Bogues, this person who was obviously filled with contradictions, the classical Renaissance man, the statesman for which, you know, about whom, and the things written about whom, for which we laud him today. If you were to fast forward to Jamaica, that type of body or even boisterous characteristic is not something that among youth is considered to be promising. Is it perhaps part and parcel of how he experienced his adolescence and his younger adulthood and the experiences when he went off to war that would have framed who the philosopher in Norman Manley became, Professor Bogues?
Yeah, I mean, I think that Trevor, Professor Munroe is right. You know, and Arnold Bertram has described that very well in, you know, that those incidents very well in the book. The very good book biography of NW. But I think that what made him, a couple of things made him the way he became, I think. And there's in these things, there's no one master key, I think, that then opens up the door and says, okay, that, you know, there's an accretion of things and events that kind of shape, I think, human beings. And I think obviously going to London and having to live in London at a time of racial discrimination made him a person who began to think about the questions of racial discrimination. It also made him think about this business of what does Jamaica mean? What does it mean to be a crown colony, which is what Jamaica was at that time? I think they going to war, what that did, fighting in the war, and then the death of his brother, what that did was give him a certain kind of courage, which he always had, but which I think became much more consolidated in his life as a person, and he would always be that. He would have to, if he had to take a hard decision, he would take the hard decision. And then I think the other thing that you know is that people, the intellectual of the, you know, the early 20th century, the colonial intellectual going to London, navigating Oxford, that one of the things that he had to do is that you have to be better than everybody else. You couldn't be second best in that kind of scenario. You had to show that you are better than everybody else. And then I think the other thing is a deep attachment to reading, which he always had, and an attachment to argument. But not just argument for argument's sake, but argument for serious sake. So I think when you look at all those things, what you're looking at is the formation of a character. But I think, to be very frank with you, that one of the things that always strikes me about him, and it strikes me when I travel in Jamaica and go through St. Catherine, is where he grew up with his mother, and that village. And because I think there's a way in which we in Jamaica don't think about what that village life means in rural Jamaica to many people and how it actually shaped them. I know it shaped me before I came to town, and I therefore think that we want also has to look at that, not so much in Manchester, but the village in St. Catherine. Then he's going to St. Jacob High School, to St. Beckford and Smith, and then moving on to Jamaica College. So I think you look at all those things to begin to understand this character, who then comes back from Oxford as a lawyer, throws himself into law, and then makes a move from law into politics, first into social welfare, and then into politics.
Let me turn to Vincent Morrison. Vincent, when you listen to the journey traced by Maxine and Trevor and Tony Bogues and the reference to the writings of Scree Bertram, Norman Manley in the early 30s is a man who had many choices, many routes he could have pursued. And then eventually he came to participate in the establishment of the People's National Party, and with a famous emphasis that he highlights to unswervingly serve the masses, or the interest rather of the masses of the people. What in him do you think drew him to that almost obsessive attention on uplifting the masses of the people, Vincent?
Well, let me just put that question in context. There's no question that Norman Manley was the greatest barrister, lawyer in the West Indies. In fact, his appearance in front of one of the first lawyers who appeared before the Privy Council in London. And the accolades that flowed from his conduct, his presentation in front of that council was legendary. There's no question that he was just a brilliant person. The fact, though, is that as a country boy, growing up in Manchester, growing up in Belmont, St. Catherine, he experienced estate life. He was with the people, he was there, he saw the condition, the poverty, the struggle. And he put aside all that glamour, all that money that he could have made in terms of his practice, and decided to champion the cause of the masses. There's no question that between 1938 and 55, you know, there was a lot of sacrifice. We could talk about the problems he had with the left in the party, but he stood fast. A lot of patience. He decided on a course. And, you know, when he won government in 1955, and when you look on what he was achieved under his administration in terms of governance, etc., it was just simply remarkable. The formation of the National Workers Union, the whole issues surrounding the struggle, the right to vote, universal adult suffrage, education, what he did for education in terms of the secondary, high schools, and the common entrance, what he achieved in terms of political independence. He was the architect of the fight, not only for self-government, but for political independence. And then when you look on the host, the number of things that he did, for example, the development of the tourism sector, Negril, we talk about Negril. He was the person who made the first arrangement to develop Negril. The Bank of Jamaica, the bauxite sector, Development Bank, Central Planning Unit, Agricultural and Industrial Development Corporation, which is now JAMPRO, the Scientific Research Council, the Farm Program, Farm Work Program. You could go on and on and on. But one of the things I'd like to mention here was that I think he had a very good team with him. Neda Sewell, who became the first governor of the Bank of Jamaica, to me was his friend. And a lot of the things that we're now enjoying as a country, Norman Manley laid the foundation, because the difference with Norman and others was that Norman Manley had a plan. And I don't want to sound politically critical, but a plan cannot be we are with the West. He had a plan for the development of Jamaica. And it's a pity that he didn't get the chance to lead Jamaica into independence. But if you look at the governance issues that we are having in Jamaica today, and you look at how Norman Manley charted the course between 1955 and 1962, all of these institutions that were put in place, so that we have at least that level to start on now. It is totally remarkable. Norman Manley had made up his mind that, look, I'm going to put away my lucrative law practice, and I'm going to give my service to the people of Jamaica. And his statements when he retired in 1969, that the mission of his generation was to accomplish the whole question of political independence. And now the generation that will succeed him will now have to take on the mantle for economic independence for our country. I don't know how much we have been able to achieve that, but the question is that the foundation, the constitution, the building of Jamaica as a country, we have to say that Norman Manley gave it his all.
Mrs. Henry Wilson, among the many talents that are ascribed to Norman Manley, none of them include being either an architect or an engineer. But when we listened to Vincent just now, and as he listed some of the institutions, of course, there are several stellar pieces of legislation which were championed by Norman Manley. We're told even in opposition in the first decade or so of independence, while he was leader of the opposition, would suggest someone that had already charted the essential elements and features that a nation in its infancy would require to stand up shoulder to shoulder with other nations in the global community. And most of it happened in just one term. When you think of subsequent administrations of whichever derivation in Jamaica since that time, have we been able to take the kind of steps Norman Manley would have been proud of were he still with us today?
Well, you know, I really can't look on my crystal ball and and tell you, but I think there are some aspects of his life, his public life, that we have not sufficiently explored. I don't know how much scholarship is being done about it, but the period that fascinated me a lot, apart from the period when he was in government, was the period from, say, 1930 to 1944. Why? Because I think the measure of a person is how much they succeed, but also how much they may not succeed. And during that period, I think there were several, what I would call enigmatic issues. For instance, I grew up with a grandmother who did not think, and who thought that Norman Manley was a traitor to Black people. Why? First of all, his pronouncements about Marcus Garvey. She always told us about that. That to me is something that we probably later can understand, but remember, Marcus Garvey had a nationalist platform as well. So what was it, what have we done the discussions around that? Secondly, there is a view that he was the one who caused Bustamante to break off from the PNP because he did not carry out some of the things that were promised. Remember, Bustamante was a member of the PNP, you know, either in form or in substance. So I'm thinking, and then he didn't succeed in his first go around at electoral politics, right, but he sustained it. These are the kinds of things I think that are the lessons that are important, especially for a PNP now. How did he sustain a movement for perhaps nearly 17 years without being in government? He lost his seat, but he kept the leadership, made the party go on. And I think that is the vision that he had, the formation of the Jamaica Welfare Limited, and how that was to, he kept saying, we are preparing to build a new Jamaica. That was the motto. So he took all the failures, the losses, and brought them forward to 1955 when he finally won. And he was only there for 7 years, but it's as if he was there for 70 years. He passed over 400 pieces of legislation. Our comrade here spoke about the institutions that he built. He was an institution builder. And then in all of that, he tried to get a handle on the economic development component with the Sir Arthur Lewis, bringing Sir Arthur Lewis to begin to formulate something that would be almost an indigenous set of principles for the economic development. Now, he didn't succeed at everything. There's a view that he should not have called the referendum. That's when I first saw him, when he was conceding defeat. But his vision was for a federal Caribbean. And then when that's my understanding, and I'm not sure we have done enough work around those things. Also, the expulsion of the 4 H's, that's another kind of contradiction. I did my research in undergraduate on that, and it was fascinating, right? So I think we have to look at all the dimensions of this man to be able to understand why he was able to succeed when he came to office, and why eventually he went to London. Some people saw that as a treacherous act, that he went to London and allowed them to give us independence. We felt he should have stayed in power until his term was up, and then he could have called an election. So I think there are all these dimensions that explain this person. Almost, you know, we can't quite understand some of the things, but I think it is a coming together of all of that that makes me, for example, regard him as a real national hero. It was not only when he won, it was also when he lost that he thought of what was the best interest of the Jamaican people.
Professor Munroe, when Mrs. Henry Wilson spoke just now, and she mentioned the episodes of failure, which were significant over a long period of time. Firstly, having championed universal adult suffrage and then not winning a general election until 1955, having lost his own seat. In today's political culture, those are what we would call career-ending situations, career-ending events. But this fixity of purpose and the purpose being nation, do we have those elements sufficiently reposed in the leaders today and those who are likely to emerge as leaders today?
I'm glad you asked that question, Raymond, because what it brings back for me is the observation made by my supervisor of my master's thesis in the mid-60s, Professor Rex Nettleford. Those are the days when the people in their 20s and 30s all over the world and in Jamaica, the Rodney uprising, all the students, the social changes which brought so much positive development in maternity leave law, etc. We thought, frankly speaking, that we could change the world overnight. And what Rex said to me is, Trevor, look, you guys have great aspirations and the objectives are all really laudatory, but changing Jamaica is a marathon, not a sprint. And please recall that we've produced masses of sprinters, but how many times have we won a race in any championships on the global scale or in the hemispheric scale of over 800 meters or 1500 meters? Think about that. And I reflected on that, and I think those in Jamaica today, all of us who still see so much to change, the road still to be traveled, despite the fact that we've come so far with the input of Norman Manley and others, need to reflect on that, because he demonstrated the ability to run a marathon, even though he was a sprinter. And that's something that we have to learn. Sprint when it's appropriate and necessary, but also fix their purpose, keep that marathon, which he did. And the ability to change his method as you go along. He didn't believe that Jamaica had a political problem in the mid-30s. He thought we had a social and economic problem. Hence the formation of Jamaica welfare, the establishment of literally the predecessor of the SDC when it would have been non-partisan and independent. But he was persuaded by the events of the day, the people like Fairclough, that look, it's not just economic, we need to get political self-determination, we need to get hold of the political system in order to make the economic and social changes. So he modified his views, went into politics in the way that we've been discussing. But even then, let me give you an episode which I have heard, and in fact, my discussions with Richard Hart confirm. Bustamante was on the platform at the foundation of the People's National Party. As Maxine has pointed out, there was a unified national movement with labor and the middle class self-determination aspirations sitting together. But as I have gotten it, this leader of labor, recognized by all, including NW, was not recognized while sitting on that platform. And what it reflected is the extent to which the social divisions in Jamaica were real, that the middle class had certain reservations about the capacity of the working people, and that divide was what Norman and the leaders of the labor movement that formed with him to contest with Bustamante had to contend with, that the middle class had to persuade the masses that we are for you, that we're genuinely concerned with your bread and butter issues alongside the political. And only by the late 1940s did this happen. So from 38 to 49, that long slogging, going around the country to persuade folks that really we need to come together. And then the issues to the left. Norman, as I understand it, did not want that split. He wanted to keep the party together, but it occurred and it created challenges, which policy issues, which many would say would have held back Jamaica's social transformation. And then that aspect of Manley, the willingness to pay a price, to self-sacrifice. Here's a man at the peak of his professional career. As Vincent points out, one of the most famous, celebrated barristers, not only in the Caribbean, but in the empire. But he subordinates the self-interest in pursuing that very lucrative and successful career to the people's cause. And in fact, there's a quotation which we see where he said, in the 30s, I want to find a purpose beyond my own self-advancement and my own professionalism. And that purpose was the people's cause. And two other occasions, his philosophical commitment to democracy overpowered his personal interest in power. So the referendum on the Federation in 1961, that need not have been held when it was. The opponents of Federation made that a cause on an opportunistic sense. And then after that, he wins the election in 1959, before the referendum. He has a 5-year term, 59 to go into 64. But on principle, he felt, look, we're going to independence, give the people a chance as to who should lead them. And he lost. And therefore, one of the ironies is that the person who most promoted self-government and independence never became Prime Minister of Jamaica. And that's a price he was willing to pay. And it's a lesson for all of us. Career, yes. Self-advancement, yes. But if we're going to change our country for the better, then we need to balance and subordinate that to service to the people at some point. And Norman Manley is the exemplar of that, despite the criticisms as I had of him. And he was very upset by them, by the way. In fact, in that conference in 1964, when the young socialist students from the university, I was not yet 20, challenged him. And he it's the first and last time I've heard the term. He said, who do you whippersnappers think you are? And I understand whippersnappers mean to me hurry-come-ups. You guys, you haven't been what we have been through. And you're coming to tell us now about our land reform policy not being radical enough, that the country is still too much of the land in the hands of the minority, and we needed to divide it up. And on reflection, our perspectives are insufficiently appreciative of what the national movement had to go through, Manley's personal sacrifices and others, to bring Jamaica to independence and to where social reforms became possible in subsequent administrations. So I thought I'd mention that the marathon he started, transforming from a sprinter to carry us and to lead us to where we were, so that in the road which remains to be traveled, we need to learn as well. It's likely to be a continuation of the marathon rather than a sprint.
That marathon, Professor Tony Bogues, maybe may say, is an illustration in arrested development. Norman Manley spoke in 1969 of the success of his generation and referencing political independence and the suggestion that the next generation would have emphasized economic independence. A series of generations of leaders later, economic independence, insofar as it exists, is still not, has still escaped Jamaica. I'd like to hear your comments on that as we close the round with also a reference throughout history of great leaders who take their people or their following to a point, but not able to participate beyond that point, starting with the biblical example of Moses and several others. Is it almost predestined, Professor Bogues, for the archetype leader that transforms and sets the path to transformation to not actually lead that transformation? And which generation exactly was he speaking to with reference to the economic independence?
Yeah. Thank you, Raymond. A couple of things. One is that I don't think NW himself would have believed in predestination or in fate. I think for him, the question was always, how do we make our way in this place? And we may have limitations or circumstances that may, and obstacles, but that we always have to confront them and try and make our way. And the second point I would want to make is, and before I come to what you say, it has to do with what Maxine Henry has said about failure. I think it's important to understand between the 30s and 1944 that N.W. Manley himself, and I'm not convinced of this, did not really think about a political party as such. That what he was thinking about was a national movement. And that therefore he structured the People's National Party. When you look at the work, the rules that govern groups, when you look at the democratic structure of the party that he laid down, it was about how to pull people in, not for election, but to build what he called, in his words, to build a certain kind of organized politics. For what objective? For what he called, and here I quote him, the attainment of nationality. It is only after Adam's suffrage in 44 that he begins and if you read the documents carefully and the debates inside the party, you would see that he's beginning to think about, okay, we now have to turn this thing to electoral machine. And one of the reasons he doesn't win in 44 in election is that he is not organized as an election. The party is not organized that way. It is organized as a national movement where the party groups, when you look at their agenda, is about what? Relationship to the community and political education. 2 items on every party, on every party group agenda. Because for him, it was a question of a certain kind of organized politics. And I think that what I think is important for our generation, or well, not mine, but for another generation, is to actually begin to think about politics as an organized venture for the attainment of something, not politics as a kind of catch-a-should-be game in which it's about branding mostly or consumer this, and it's about the seizure of state power, not for the transformation of Jamaica, but actually for a certain kind of self-aggrandizement. And so that I think one of the things, if you're thinking about economic independence, is that you do not have economic independence without a certain kind of political structure, certain sense of politics about how to organize the society and so on. And that one of the things that we might want to think about is that economic independence and quote sovereignty of independence might be very difficult in a globalized world. And we have to think through, okay, how do you manage that? What are the things you need to do and so on? What things you need to keep so that you have sovereignty of self and a sovereignty of society. But also then, very importantly, what is the kind of politics that goes along with that? Because NW was seen as a statesman because in my view, he practiced a certain kind of politics. And at the heart of that, the practice of that politics was a firm commitment to what? To making sure that the masses of the Jamaican people in his vision was that interest was always represented first. And then secondly, that it was a practice of democracy, deep democracy, even when you are going to lose, right? Even when people are going to say you are this. I mean, there is a letter between him and C.L.R. James, and C.L.R. James was the secretary of the West Indian Federal Party at the time. And when NW announces that he's going to go to the election, C.L.R. James and a whole host of people in the Caribbean wrote him and said, what are you thinking of? Are you half crazy? You can't be thinking about that. If you lose, we will then have Bustamante and the Federation will then be mashed up. And NW wrote back to James a very long letter and said, you obviously don't understand the principle of democracy. That if we say that we are going to do this, and we are going to, and that's the direction we are going to go, then I'm not that I don't care what happens, but whatever the consequences, then we have to stand for it. And it is that, to me, it is a certain integrity in politics, a certain way of thinking about democracy, a certain way of thinking about politics itself as a good. This is not just as a career, but politics as a public service, and therefore good, a public good. That to me is a kind of hallmark. And if we are trying to think about today and change in Jamaica, and using Trevor's phrase, running the marathon. The question of the marathon is, what are the modalities? What is the style in which you're going to run that marathon? And you have to run that marathon, in my view, in the style of N.W. Manley. We can criticize him, right? Because as we say, nobody is flawless. But he has left us, in my view, a legacy of a certain kind of political life, which I think it behoves us in the 21st century to pay a great deal of attention to.
Among the panel is a former general secretary of the political organization that bears Norman Manley's very philosophical and intellectual DNA. And she will also tell you, I am sure, that part of the process of achieving these noble ideals requires state office, which requires political organizations to win. Can there, in the concept of a marathon for national development, Maxine Henry Wilson, be some accommodation for, shall we say, expected defeat at the polls, but still a commitment that inspires and brings state actors and stakeholders together to achieve a national good?
There are one or two things that I may not agree with. For example, I agree that Norman Manley may not have thought about politics qua politics, but I think he thought very deeply about the interests of the masses of the people, which to me is politics. And yes. His organization of the PNP was not that it was quintessentially an electoral machine, but because of how it was organized, it is the most effective electoral machine if we use it the way that he did. Because remember, his thing about 7 people in a group was because those 7 persons represented particular social interests. You should go into your community and find out who are the main constituents, and I don't mean here politically, but you remember they had the burial scheme, and they had the where you save your money, St. Mary, and the formation of the credit union. You were to go into your community and find those social actors and bring representatives into the organization. Those 7 people in each group should then be your electoral workers. Now, I am fascinated by the fact that the PNP of today does not know that. And when I see some of what we're doing, where we are superimposing on the party organization what we call party workers, I don't think that we are carrying forward what is the essential vision and mission of the People's National Party. And this is where I have a difference in some of what I see what is going on. The People's National Party is not an electoral machine per se, but it has the capacity to convert itself into an election machine after you have done the organizational work. And I believe we need to go back to that principle. And that is also, sometimes you have to be out of government, the trees and the forest, you have to be out of government to organize yourself. Whenever we have been out of government, my experience is that we have done fairly well at organizing ourselves for the next term. It's like going back to come forward and use this period to rebuild our party. That's really my understanding of, you don't have to be in power all the time. You can serve the people from the opposition by being the watchdog of what is taking place in a constructive way and preparing yourself for the next leg of the journey.
For the present conversation, the ethos within which Jamaica finds itself on the global scene, as well as our own strides, still trying to achieve from a small island a great nation. What element of Norman Manley's do you believe, sticking with you still, Maxine, and then to the other panelists as we close. What element of Norman Manley is most needed, most applicable to the times?
Maybe I can jump off on
what Tony
so Maxine first. Okay.
the
Yes.
democracy of the party and the party as a leader of the democratic process in Jamaica, which here means representing first the interests of the Jamaican people.
All right. Trevor?
I think Norman Manley's recognition that the party was not to be the be all and the end all. Recall that the fact that Jamaica achieved universal adult suffrage in 1944, the first predominantly Black country in the entire world to get adult suffrage, that historic achievement was done because the party recognized and forged partnerships with independent, what we would call today, civil society organizations. The Jamaica Agricultural Society, a very remarkable group called the Federation of Citizens Associations, played such a crucial role in that coalition, which had the party in there, but the party was not seeking to undermine, to take over, or subordinate these other independent organizations. And I believe that in the changed times of the 21st century, where in most countries, the political parties have become far narrower in terms of public trust and confidence, and where so many young people and older people find a way to make a contribution through civil society organizations or civil society bodies or citizens associations, anti-corruption groups, you name it, trade unions, that these have a critical role. Norman Manley recognized that, worked with them, and so in fact, should most political parties in most countries are finding it necessary to do. So it's not only with the PNP, but the Jamaica Labour Party, any other political organization have to acknowledge Manley's legacy in partnering with them as independent entities with their own specific purposes, but joining where there's a common endeavor to make the masses of our people better off, empower them, as well as improve their economic and social conditions. That's one of the important lessons that I derive. And his concern, very few people recognize this, at the making of our independence constitution, one of the issues that's going to come up for debate in the coming weeks and months is the relative dominance of the Prime Minister over the entire government's apparatus. A huge debate in the Independence Constitution Making Committee. Norman Manley said, we have to make sure that there are checks and balances which do not allow the Prime Minister to become what the first Vice President of the People's National Party said he should be at the time with Isaac, a constitutional dictator, agreed to by Edward Seago. Both said, look, whatever you want to say about this constitution, it needs to recognize that the Prime Minister is a constitutional dictator for 5 years. Norman Manley says, no, that should not be so. Ultimately, he lost that debate because the Jamaican Prime Minister, unlike the Prime Ministers in other Caribbean territories, is able to have an absolute power to dissolve the Parliament if in his own party, persons were to say, Prime Minister, we really want to change for somebody else in our party, as happened to Boris Johnson a few weeks ago in the UK or Margaret Thatcher earlier on. Jamaican Prime Minister could say, okay, you don't want me, I'll call election right now. The Governor General, the head of state, has no option to say, no, let us see who comes out victorious in the parliamentary party's discussion and decision. So he lost that debate and it's coming up again. How do we ensure that our democracy does not concentrate too much power in a prime minister, but that the parliament has capability and the people have capability to hold both to account?
Vincent Morrison, what element of Norman Manley is most needed today?
Well, I just want to back up a bit. Historically, the first collective labor agreement that was signed in the sugar industry was done by Norman Manley on behalf of the Bustamante Industrial Trade Union. And that was done when Bustamante was in detention or Park County. I want to make the point though that Manley was not a communist, and I don't know, that bus that drove from Southeast Clarendon to Wharf to look on that ship that Russian ship that came to buy pimento. That was a dagger. Huh? In terms of Norman Manley, when you talk about his integrity, his honesty, his commitment, that is what is lacking in Jamaica today. And I believe, I don't know how we're going to get back to those days or those ideals, but we cannot run a nation unless we are true to ourselves. Norman Manley loved Jamaica. He wanted to build this country. That was his mission. The fact that he didn't get the chance to do it at the level that he wanted, history will deal with that. But integrity, honesty, these are issues that we need, and we need to take an example out of Norman Manley's book going forward.
Professor Tony Bogues, you will have the final words, sir. What element of Norman Manley is most needed today?
I think there are two things. One, where I began, ironclad integrity. That politics is not a career for self and for self-riches. Let's put it that way. And that the state, the Jamaican state, we should not be used as personal checkbooks to enrich people. So that I think is really very important. It comes under the rubric of corruption, and so people generally call it, but it is really about trying to find that way of practicing politics in which integrity is ironclad integrity is absolutely critical. And then the second thing is democracy. A real how do we democratize this country in ways in which sometimes we call it participatory democracy and so on, but how do we find a way in which the voice of the ordinary person in this country means something, and means something profound and significant as to how, in fact, we go forward. Those two things to me, trying to develop deep democracy inside this country, in the party, as political parties, but also thinking about deep democracy in the country, and a certain kind of ironclad integrity, in which politics is about a public good and never about self-aggrandizement.
Well, thank you, Professor Tony Bogues, Professor Trevor Munroe, Mr. Vincent Morrison, and Maxine Wilson. I just want to say, as we close, as moderator, whenever I participate in processes like this one, or with the meeting with the members of the board of the Norman Manley Foundation, I come away with a gaping question: who is Norman Manley still? Because on each occasion, you learn so much more. You are almost triggered to go on yet another search. And I'd like to thank each of the panelists for helping that gaping question to be more easily answered on the next occasion, and for sharing so much about a man who is as much a mystery today as he must have been as he moved across these 14 parishes of Jamaica. A national hero, one of 7 we celebrate as we do each year, not just in Heroes Week, but as we approach our independence celebrations. That was the Norman Manley edition of Back the Culture, and we thank you for joining us as always.
As children, we learn the true meaning of being a hero. Being a hero requires great sacrifice for others, not just ourselves. We learn about the heroes of Jamaica's past and how much of themselves and their lives they had to give in building a nation we should be proud to call home. They believed in a Jamaica that was more than just a country, more than just an island, more than land surrounded by water. They believed in a dream of a free nation of people, a nation built on the foundation of their sacrifices, a nation of many people working as one, a nation that will continue to produce legends and nation builders that serve towards that vision. As children, we were also taught the national pledge, a solemn promise, an undertaking. I would like to believe Sir Hugh Sherlock, while writing this pledge, understood the vision and dreams of our heroes. It's clear being a hero is too much to ever ask any one citizen. Luckily, the pledge does not require heroics of any of us. It merely asks that we honor our heroes by striving to advance our nation and ultimately inspire the world, like they and many Jamaicans have done. It's important we remember those words. These words. Before God and all mankind, I pledge the love and loyalty of my heart, the wisdom and courage of my mind, the strength and vigor of my body in service of my fellow citizens. I promise to stand up for justice, brotherhood, and peace, to work diligently and creatively, to think generously and honestly, so that Jamaica may, under God, increase in beauty, fellowship, and prosperity, and play her part in advancing the welfare of the whole human race. If you are like me, a Jamaican born and raised on this land, maybe you will remember saying those words, singing that song in a classroom or some general assembly. If so, like me, you made a pledge. Somehow it seems like many of us have forgotten that. The crime and violence, the indiscipline and short-sightedness, the corruption, the lack of respect for our beautiful lands we are blessed with, and the waters that surround and nurtures us. We have to do better. Let us honor our heroes so that they would not have sacrificed so much in vain. I hope this video can make a difference to even one soul. If so, it would all be worth it. If you feel the way I do, share it. May my voice become yours. Thanks for watching.
What can I say? I'm like a basket that has been filled to the brim. Thank you to all the distinguished guests for such a great information. I'm truly feeling filled right now with all the knowledge I've just gained. Of course, about Norman Manley as we celebrate our Back to Culture show. Thank you to all the wonderful viewers and listeners around the world. We say thank you. So I'm going to close off right now with around 3 songs or so. Once again, thank you to the team. Everything was just so wonderfully presented, from the National Pledge to the National Anthem to our speakers. It has been just a great presentation. So I say thank you to Charles and the entire team for putting together this great presentation as we continue the National Hero series as we celebrate Jamaica National Hero. Back in the Culture Show. Our motto, out of many, one people.
Beautiful people.
People of different colors, different shades, different races, but we are one.
We love, we laugh, we cry. We smile, we frown, we sigh. We believe, we know we're right. No matter what they taught us or how we were brought up, yeah. We dream, we hope, we pray. We work, we toil, we play. We bleed, we grieve, we fight. No matter where we come from, this is my assumption. People of a different color, pray to a different day. Find a way to get along with each other. Do it for the children's sake. People of a different color, pray to a different day. Find a way to get along with each other.
That's what we do tonight, yeah.
No matter what they talk,
and in all the series, we teach you so you can learn.
We fall, we bruise, we heal. We all think our burden's real. No matter where we come from, this is my assumption. People love the people right to
Yes, me, I stay, yes. Now go away now. Yes, me, I stay.
Jamaica land we love.
I wouldn't want to run away. That's a no-no. Oh. Yes, I'm me born and raised. Yes, I'm me grow. Oh. So no politician and no tribal war. Not even immigration couldn't keep me from
that place.
Away from this land of sunshine and lots of beautiful people. Away from this land, yes. Good life with reggae music.
There are a lot of beautiful places in the world, but none compare to our land of love.
The system is one big hustling.
All Jamaicans and friends of Jamaicans around the world.
Me love Jamaica, me not sell out. Them try clip we wings, somehow we can't fly out. But when we there, yard, nothing nice like Jamaica. Roast breadfruit and banana. Under the tree with a glass of lemonade. Jumping at the river when me ready for bed. No boy can't buy me out. Me no foreign minded, no way compared to Jamaica. Jamaica love, we wanna feel Jamaica love. Everybody wanna visit Jamaica. Jamaica love, Jamaica, Jamaica love. We wanna see Jamaica love. The one that represents.
Where are you representing right now?
Jamaica love, Jamaica. Represent where you born. Tune up hurricane and stop. From the time red jack, me no matter about tax man, still a hustler than a quan. Jamaican have the link to the link. They can Canadian, American, England.
That concludes
and I hustle mama visit Western Union.
This evening presentation.
All the hard man, them fear of ambition.
We say thank you once again to the entire team
Real Jamaican.
for putting this show together.
I wish partner the world where you stand.
Thank you all our distinguished speakers and guests.
Jamaica love.
Most of all,
you wanna feel.
We say thanks to the viewers, the listeners around the world. We say thank you so much.
Jamaica love. Jamaica.
Until next time.
Jamaica love.
When we talk about National Hero number 7.